Have you ever wondered if what you're doing on a scheme of religious is enough? I mean, if you look at religion and what you consider to be religious, do you ever wonder, am I doing it right? Do you ever, say, I mean, I don't know. Some people, it's really easy for me to start comparing, right? Because, being a pastor and having other pastor friends and associates going through seminary, it's very fascinating to me because actually just a couple of weeks ago I met up with one I hadn't seen in over a decade. And we start talking, and the first thing we talk about is the size of our church, right? I mean, it's like the number game, right? Which is ridiculous. We both know it's wrong, but that's just where we went. Kind of humorous when you think about it, but do you ever think that perhaps we judge ourselves based on a scale that, I don't know, that we figure out it's artificial and it's just there and we judge based on it? Do you ever wonder, maybe you're not doing enough? I've had family and friends do some crazy adventures for God. Go way out of the way over the world. And they go all these amazing things. And they come back with all these stories to tell. And I look at myself going, what am I doing? What have I done? Am I doing enough? I see other religions religiously, literally, try to get on God's good side by doing various actions, right? They try to accommodate for themselves enough good points, going door to door, helping the poor, going out of their way, not even a cow. I mean, whatever the situation may be, they attempt to live a life, a religious quota, something that they do, the standard that they try to hold to themselves. And they do it so intently and so profoundly that it's almost envious. When I look at them, I realize these guys are really trying. And I look at myself and I go, I don't know. Am I doing enough, right? There's the question to ask myself, am I doing enough? The problem is I compare, I judge, and I wonder. So if you're like me this morning, there's a possibility we can talk about that. But there's a danger to this, is that on the flip side of that equation, some people don't wonder at all. They think perhaps they have arrived. They are there. They are doing everything they can. You kind of get the feeling when you talk to these people, right? They get the holier-than-thou attitude, and they're explaining to you everything that they think is wrong with you, but never looking at themselves saying what could be wrong with them, right? You get that kind of perspective. There are those people out there. Maybe people think that their religious efforts, whatever they may be, may move their picture higher on God's refrigerator, right? They get that idea that there is somehow, some way, they can earn enough points for God's favor. Maybe, just maybe, those people are too confident in their own efforts. And maybe, just maybe, those are the things they need to work on. This morning, as we continue through the book of James, we will see a proper definition of what we would refer to as good, true, and undefiled religion. It's a very fascinating word there, religion. I believe James uses it in the same sense I do, in the sense that it is a bunch of do's and don'ts that you follow for the purpose of showing basically what's on your inside, right? It's not saying anything like good or bad. The word just describes your outward actions that you liberally follow that show what really lies within your heart, right? So as James looks at that, we can find just a real simple thing in James 1, 26 and 27. It's kind of like looking back on last week a little bit, looking into a mirror for us all. It gives us a chance to see what exactly are we doing, both on the outward and the inward perspective, and how does it look at? I think we will find as we look into this mirror that truly religion before God means to have control of your tongue, to practice practical compassion, and to strive for purity in this world. I read in the commentary this past week that James 1:26 and 27 is the summary statement of the entirety of the chapter 1 in the book, and in some ways it's a way of conceptualizing the entire letter's ethical position. In some way, this is the simple standpoint that we look at and will see throughout the rest of the book. In this context, we see that by religion, James means the external evidence of inward piety, as the definition of religion actually is. The Greek word actually only appears 3 places in the New Testament, twice in the book of James and once in the Pauline letters. And it's very interesting how when they look at it from the very perspective, and it's an easy word to understand, and it's one that we can relate to today. So if you will, you can turn with me to James chapter 1. We'll start with the 26th verse. It says, "If anyone thinks he is religious without controlling his tongue, then his religion is useless, and he deceives himself. Pure and undefiled religion before our God and Father is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world." A couple of things we can see there right off the bat. And the first thing I want to say before we jump into that is I love how James says this. It's almost a tongue-in-cheek, almost a passive-aggressive, almost a funny way of saying that. He goes, if anyone thinks he is religious. Now in Greek, there's the word if has 3 different meanings. It really can. And so you have to look at the context to see what it means. It could mean if, as in, it's kind of like one of those ideas that says, if it rains tomorrow, then we'll go to the park, implying we don't know if it's going to rain or not. It's uncertain. It's a true if statement. There's an if statement that says, if the sky is blue tomorrow, we'll go to the park, which means, yeah, the sky is blue tomorrow, so we are going to the park. And then there's that one that says, if the sky is pink tomorrow, which means, no, it's not, it's blue, so we know it's wrong, then we'll go to the park, which means we're not going to the park tomorrow. Right? They use that word kind of like a little, sarcasm thrown in a little bit. And it's the way the Greek actually just operates. But in this case, we see if anyone thinks he's religious without controlling his tongue, then his religion is useless and he deceives himself. I would argue this is a statement that says it's a negative. Everybody knows your religion. You're not religious if you aren't controlling your tongue. It's not a true if statement. This is a definite one that says, no, ain't no way. And we see all those things in the way it works throughout all the New Testament. Paul does it too. He says in Galatians 6:3, for example, "For if those who are nothing think they are something, they deceive themselves." Or in 1 Corinthians 3:18, "If you think you are wise in this age, and you are not, you should become fools so that you may become wise." You see, it's a common Greek theme to put that emphasis on, if you really think you're that good, then obviously it should. But no one does. No one really does think that way. I think what James is basically telling us right here is that you can't really think you are truly religious without controlling your tongue. You're only deceiving yourself. If you truly are religious, then you will control your tongue, and that's what you would think. So the very fundamental start of this says a person who with true religion controls their tongue. We look at that, and it says if anyone thinks he is religious without controlling his tongue, then his religion is useless and he deceives himself. Hate to break it to you, but great speech doesn't matter if your actions don't match up. You can't go to church on Sunday and then on Monday turn around and cuss up a blue streak and expect yourself to say, I'm okay. God's okay with me. It doesn't work that way. If you truly think that, then you're deceiving yourself. You're basically lying to your own self. There is a standard that God holds, a standard that we must meet. It's knowing how to speak well is not nearly as important as speaking appropriately, i.e., controlling your tongue. Now, there's a couple of things that go with that. It doesn't necessarily mean to just lie. I think that's the one thing people get often confused by that. They think controlling your tongue is just about honesty, right? No. It's not so simple as that, unfortunately. It's knowing when to speak. There's an appropriate time and place to talk. There's an appropriate thing to speak about. Okay? sharing private information of someone else with a third party is never a good idea. We call that gossip. You know, we don't want to be the ones that break bad news to people that is no bad news to be broken to them for. You know, we don't want to be that person that goes out of their way to start spreading rumors. Even if it's true what you heard, you don't need to say it. Controlling your tongue goes far beyond the realm of honesty. Proverbs 21:23 says, "The one who guards his mouth and tongue keeps himself out of trouble." Knowing when to speak and what to speak of is part of controlling your tongue. But it also implies the honesty factor as well. Very simple, we've all heard it. Thou shalt not lie. Or as other translations say, bear false witness. Now, I don't necessarily believe that we talk about lying in the sense of, a black and white issue. I think God's attitude and his approach to that is more of a heart attitude of what's going on, right? What are you aiming to do when you talk? Are you trying to deceive someone for the wrong purpose? Or are you doing something to try to perhaps save a life? You remember in the book of Genesis where the midwives, Pharaoh had told the midwives to cast all the Hebrew boys in the Nile. And the midwives didn't. And Pharaoh called them before him and said, "What's going on?" And the midwives said, Hebrew women are just too strong. They're giving birth before we get there. That's a direct lie. They were not honest with Pharaoh. Yet, the text says that God blessed them and gave them families of their own. It's a very unique statement because I was raised with the assumption of lying is always bad in every circumstance. And so you're expected just to be blindly honest everywhere you go, right? Leave it all to God, right? The example that I heard growing up was, the Nazis come knocking on the door and they say, "Do you have Jews in your house?" And if you had said yes, and there were up there, then you give them up. If you say no, then you're lying. You got a bad situation here. Which one do you do? And it's it's not. It's not. It's the intent. God's looking at your heart. What are you trying to do? When Dad asks you if you cleaned your room and you say yes, and you haven't, you're trying to lie to Dad to get out of work. That's wrong. Not talking to anyone in particular here, okay? But when they come knocking and they want to do harm or cause problems and you're doing it to protect somebody, I don't think God views that in the part of the deception. The idea of the commandment speaks to bearing false witness against your neighbor. It's the idea with an intent and motive to cause harm or, as the case may be, to escape punishment on yourself. It's a very selfish or intentional viewpoint. But if you are doing it for the right reasons, I don't think we have to worry about the lying aspect. Rabbit trail right there. But controlling your tongue means to not speak deceptively with the intent to cause harm. All right? Understand that. The person with true religion will watch what he says, when he says it, and will not do it with the intent to cause harm in any which way, shape, or form. That is the first step we would have to identifying ourselves as having good and true and undefiled religion, controlling our tongue. The second one is a little more interesting because it says right there in verse 27, it says, "Pure and undefiled religion before God the Father is this, to look after widows and orphans in their distress." Right there we see a little bit of practical compassion, as another pastor once said. He says, it's not about the perfect observance of rules, observations, of do's and don'ts. It's not about even just, figuring out the best way forward. It's a simple reality. Part of having a checklist, if you will, to look in the mirror to see how we are doing is how are we treating those who are less fortunate than ourselves? In particular, those closest to us. How are we treating with them? It's an aspect that reveals what's going on in our hearts. If you can look at a person who is struggling and not have any compassion, zero compassion, there is something wrong with you. There is something wrong with your relationship with God. There is something wrong with your religion. Right? That's all it talks about. It talks about our thing. Our conduct must be kept in accordance with what we say. What we do, how we act, must follow what we say. We say we love Jesus, then fine. Let's show it. Let's show that we do. Orphans and widows are often mentioned in the Bible as the concerns simply because there really wasn't a whole lot for them. The assumption was an orphan had no parent to take care of him, no parent to train him. Without any kind of proper parental structure, it also meant things like usually they had no chance in the future. There was no jobs to be had. They became beggars. That was it. That was their life. You couldn't have a home. You didn't have a family history. You didn't have anything in the Jewish circle of influence because your parents weren't there. Right? It was a sentence to poverty for life to be an orphan. Very few orphans ever came out of that. It's a tough time. Widows are mentioned simply because their source of income, and generally speaking, is gone. Their source of security. The Jewish custom and the Jewish way at the time, that was just the way it was. And so it's possible that you could have a widow and an orphan that weren't in bad straits, but in a general sense of the term, widows and orphans were usually the most vulnerable people in the society that James is writing to. James, again, brings the focus right back to people. He's basically saying, once again, this whole idea of your religion goes back to individuals. How do we treat them? It's not enough to simply seek not to hurt somebody. All right? Oftentimes, I think we have that checklist in our life that says, I haven't murdered anybody. Right? Therefore, that's a thumbs up for me, I haven't done that. I didn't hit my brother, thumbs up on that. I didn't steal from somebody. I didn't cause problems with somebody. I kept myself to myself in my little square box. I let the world live as the world wants to live, and I didn't bother them, and they didn't bother me. I'm good, right? There's a lot of people who think like that. James says, no, that's not the idea. The idea is we have to be focused, outwardly focused. We got to peel apart our layers and open our doors and look at individuals and their needs. It's not enough just to say I didn't hurt somebody, but we got to go so far to help them. There are some practical issues that we need to take a little warning there. Notice what James actually says right there. When he says in verse 27, he goes, the widows and orphans in their distress. I think oftentimes we like, particularly in the United States, we like to sign checks, right? And just send money off to stuff. The United States, by far and large, is the most generous nation ever in terms of coming from individuals within the country, private people just giving to various aid groups and organizations. I mean, a lot of recovery efforts, a lot of aid going out into the rest of the world have come as a result of the Americans' kind-heartedness. And our mentality over the years kind of been that we see that TV commercial, right, as we're watching it, and it says, give to the Red Cross so they can help over whatever organization. We just whip out that checkbook, write $25, put it in the mail, and say, good. Right? That's kind of the way it is. James says, you need to pump the brakes a little bit on that. We need to care for those who need the care, not just blindly care for them. It doesn't say every widow and orphan here, okay? Because not every widow and orphan needed help. He said it's just the ones in their distress. You know, it's very fascinating to me because I've seen this in real life. I've seen people pretend to have problems outside of their own capability. My dad tells a story of a man who, once upon a time, about 50 years ago, came to the church my dad was attending and said he needed help. He couldn't pay for anything. He needed all this stuff. And my dad said, okay. So he took him grocery shopping, bought him all groceries, and then gave it to the man. And the guy comes back next week and goes, well, woe is me. I got this medication and these eyeglasses and all this stuff that need to be done, and I just don't have any money for it. So my dad said, okay, I'll meet you there. My dad goes to the eye doctor to pay for the eyeglasses. The man never shows. So my dad walks up to the receptionist and says, hey, look, this is my deal. This is what's going on. I'd like to pay for him. He probably got busy, forgot, whatever. So when he comes in, you can just give him his glasses. And the lady looked at him and goes, what are you talking about? He gets free glasses from the government, the federal government, for the rest of his life. People are looking to take advantage of this generosity. I had a lady one time call this church. She was looking for a handout. So I agreed to meet with her, arranged for some money to be given to her, and I told her right then and there that this was as far as we can go. It's a one-time deal. It's a gift from us to you. Good luck. She calls back a couple months later and asks for another handout. I gave her resources to get a job. I gave her resources and help. Told her places she could volunteer and get some situation. None of that ever happened. Folks, it's not a situation where we want to get into where we become basically a never-ending giving tree, right? Use some discretion, use some wisdom, and as James says, only put those that are in distress. It says, help the orphans and the widows in their distress. Looking after people is stressful. It is. Yet we are called to be involved. But we should always remember that we define that when the needs threaten to overwhelm our human resources. God has given us a brain to figure out how to manage it. All right? So we see helping people, practical compassion there, kind of calls into the second greatest commandment, to love your neighbor as yourself. And then he concludes with this one, and it's a very fascinating one. He goes, keep yourself unstained by the world. A good person with true religion strives for purity from this world. We're not talking about the evil necessarily in this world. We're not even, the thing's ambiguous. But I think what James is trying to say is this simple thing, the value factor. Right? What does the world value? Money, position, power, right? Fame, fortune, beauty, pride, your own stuff, right? Bible sums it up very good. The world defines it, the boast of the eyes, the boast of the flesh, and the boastful pride of life. That's what the world values. That's what they consider to be valuable. That's what they consider to be successful. You want to start talking about people. They start comparing their 401ks. They start comparing about their retirement plans. They start comparing how many cars are in their garage, how expensive their house is, right? They value a $500,000 home. Woohoo, I've made it. And then the neighbor next to him gets a $750,000 home. Whew, so you got to one up and go $875, and then it's $900, and then it's over $1 million. The world just has a value system that is crazy, and it's out of line with what God's word actually says. What do we do? James says you avoid the world's value system. You avoid it. Keep yourself pure or unstained by the world. It's not that we're not in the world, not that we're not engaging in the world, and it's not that we're not buying houses in the world. Take note, the size of your house or how expensive it costs doesn't mean anything. All right? In God's mind, you can have $1 million home or you can be living in a car. It don't matter. All right? He does not define success based on worldly goods. Let that think in. God does not define our success based on worldly goods. He does not define our success based on our titles. He does not define our success based on anything. You can be a CEO of a company and God still calls you a failure. You can be the greatest pastor in the whole world that everyone's ever known about. And God's going to say, no, that's not what I call success. Remember the terrible parable of the talents. Remember? He gives 5 to one, 2 to another, and 1 to a third. The one got 5 did 5. The one that got 2 did 2. He didn't do 5. He only did 2. But the reward for both of them was the same. God measures success differently than the world. And that's what James is trying to tell us here. We need to tread carefully when we deal with the world, that we don't fall into the world's traps. What does it look like? Well, I believe James was just echoing the words of Jesus in what has been called his high priestly prayer in John 17, where Jesus emphasized sending the disciples into the world, but expecting them not to be of the world. We're here, we engage with it, but in no way are we expected to be part of it. True religion is found controlling your tongue. It's found practical compassion, and it's found by not engaging the world on the world's level. We have seen this morning our efforts to understand what true religion is before God means to have control of your tongue, to practice the practical compassion, and to strive for purity in this world. When we strive to these goals, I think we'll be able to answer the question without hesitation. Am I doing enough? The answer should be so obvious. You're not. That should be the answer. You're not doing enough. You have not arrived. You don't have a complete picture. You see, God doesn't want a plateauing person. Someone who grows and grows and grows, and then they just start going flat. God wants you to keep growing, keep maturing, keep going deeper into your relationship with Him. Keep loving your neighbor. Keep doing these things. That's why every day we got to get up and live this out. Every morning we got to get up and understand we have to control our tongue every day. Every morning we must get up and understand we must have compassion every day. And every day we must guard ourselves against the world. It's a daily thing, day in, day out. It's a walk. Control your tongue. Love your neighbor. Seek the will of God. That is a lesson, and that is a lifestyle that a mature Christian should strive for. Let's close with a word of prayer.